Have you ever felt stuck trying to choose a research topic, not because you lack interest, but because it seems like you want to study everything? Or have you been told your ideas are too big for a single article, thesis, or dissertation? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we explore why many authors unknowingly have weak topics that end up creating friction across every stage of a project, from the literature review to the methods to the motivation itself. We focus on how a good research idea is one that is carefully shaped through narrowing, clarification, and problem identification, and offer a three-step process to help you narrow down to your next big idea. So let's dive in. So a few years ago, I was working with a master's student who wanted to do a thesis. And so they come into my office to ask me to be their thesis advisor and to put around some ideas for their thesis project. And so they sit down, we chat for a little while as one does. I'm from the South, so the obligatory BSing another person is something that's deeply ingrained in me. If I sit down to talk with someone, I'm going to have at least 5 minutes of just general shooting the breeze before I get to any type of business. That's how I was raised, man. So after we get done with that, I ask her, hey, so what's this idea that you have going on? And what is it that you want to study? And she says, well, I'm really interested in sexual education, mental health, and public schools. Cool. Those are all huge areas. Any one of those is in and of itself a perfectly fine topic area. But now you're wanting to put all three of those together. I start showing her searches that I'm doing there as we talk on through the university library, through Google Scholar, through other search engines about not just how big these three topics are by themselves, but how whenever you put them together, they're even larger, even more complicated. Not to mention the fact that as a master's student, the idea of you going around talking with a protected class of people, i.e. people who are under 18, in order for you to get information on something as sensitive as sexual education and mental health just already gives me the heebie-jeebies, right? Like that's not a project that I would typically want a master's student to do. And so after a long conversation, we start to narrow down, but I realized at that point that one of the problems is that I think a lot of times early career writers are interested in topic areas, but they don't really know how to take that topic area and shape that into something that is actually a manageable project, whether that's a manageable project for a article, for a thesis, for a dissertation. And so oftentimes young writers come to their advisors or they submit work to a journal. They oftentimes get feedback that's, oh, this is too big, it's too complicated, you're trying to do too many things, there's too much going on here, you need to simplify this in order for you to be able to get this done, get it done on time if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, or to meet word count guidelines for a journal article, or just have something that's generally not a hot mess, whenever you're writing that. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how do we take our general research interests, the topics, the domains that we might think of as the areas of study that really excite us and make us curious. How do we parse those down, get those down to a place to where we can actually drill into them piece by piece into a program of research that's manageable for us over the long haul? Okay, so let's dive in.
Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea.
So as I said before, I think if we drill down and we think of what is the central problem here, I think that for a lot of writers, they get interested in a domain area. They get interested in topics. They have these big ideas, and those might be things like social media, mental health, or leadership in organizations, or college student success, right? Like these big areas. And either they don't do a careful literature review that helps them narrow things down, or they don't know how to do that yet. And so they remain at this level of research interest that is pretty much, frankly, just like an entire field of study. So if I just, something like college student success, like, oh my gosh, like there's a million and one things that go along in something like that, from admissions to student teacher relationships to extracurricular activities to Pell Grants to politics to first generation college students to race and class and sexuality and gender. And like there's so much that goes on into college student success. To say I study college student success is akin to saying I study the ocean, right? Like, no, people don't study the ocean. They study specific forms of marine life, or they study the waves, but you can't research everything in a field of study in one project. And so this creates projects whenever you go to your advisor or whenever you try to submit the journals, you're told things like it's too big, it's too vague, or maybe it's too descriptive, because you're staying at a level of abstraction that's kind of skimming the surface all the time of all of these big things that you're interested in. And it's cool that you're interested in those things, don't get me wrong, but because you've tried to address this entire field of study, something that hundreds of people over decades have been trying to study, and you're trying to take that whole thing for yourself, you're never going to be able to get more than about thimble deep in the literature because you're not drilling down enough into specific problems that can animate an actual research project. So as a result, then what I end up seeing a lot of times is endless literature reviews or very unclear literature reviews, because there's not a strong, narrow, specific enough topic to really hold on to as you're being tossed and turned by all the literature that you're reading. And instead, you're just reading a whole bunch of stuff in this general area. And with every article, you're like, oh man, that's cool. Ooh, that's a good idea. Oh, I should do that. Oh, I need to avoid that, right? And so all of those things are really pushing you around rather than you having a firm grasp of what it is that you want to write about and then figuring out how to incorporate that past work into your scholarship. So I think there are 4 reasons why this problem happens. First off, I think a lot of this comes from the type of coursework that we ask graduate students to do. You're taking 2, 3, 4 classes at a time. Each one of those classes might have you do a research project on its own. None of those professors are probably talking to each other and figuring out how a research project might be able to go across multiple classes. Instead, each professor has their own little fiefdom, their own little domain of expertise, and they make you write to that specificity of their expertise. And so as a result, the class papers that you write typically are rewarding your depth in the specific topic that the professor wants you to write about, and does that primarily through the reading list that that professor has set for you. But that means that you're not building the skills of figuring out what is important or what is not whenever it goes into your paper. Instead, that work has already been done for you by the professor. They already gave you a reading list, and then your job is primarily to show that you've read, understood, and can use the stuff that was important enough to assign you to read. But that doesn't mean that it's important for the project that you want to do, the type of researcher that you want to be, the things that make you curious or passionate about your project. And so as a result, you're not building those skills of figuring out how to narrow things down because that narrowing was already done for you in a lot of your classwork. Another way that I see this happening is because, as I noted before, a lot of early career writers don't really know the difference between a topic and a specific problem, issue, or exigency that they can actually research. So if we take the master's student at the beginning of this that I was talking about, they're interested in mental health, sexual education, and public schools. So to me, whenever I hear that, I immediately think, well, what's the specific thing going on in a public school that might wrap those 3 things together? Well, maybe like a gay straight alliance, right? A student-led group that's focused specifically on LGBT identity, about consciousness raising, about mental and emotional support in public schools. So once I've located this specific exigency, gay straight alliance clubs, then I can start to think about, okay, well, what does this club do? How do they do it? How effective are they in doing that? And then how can I create a research project that can both address this dynamic and honor the voices of those participants in a way that I can put on a page. But what's important there is that I had this specificity of a exigency, how a gay straight alliance engages in whatever type of communication pattern that I might want to study, whether that's recruitment, consciousness raising, or whatever it might be. But having that level of specificity is what takes a research idea from being just a general topic or a domain like mental health and sex ed in public schools and draws it down into a identifiable exigency or problem or issue that I can now start to wrap my hands around as a research project, and then contribute to it as a part of an ongoing conversation. A third way that I see this happening is that I think a lot of early career writers, I think they get afraid that narrowing their project means that it's not as important, that whenever we locate the specificity of an actual dynamic, in this case, a gay-straight alliance, or any other type of actual concrete thing that takes it down from the high heights of the ivory tower and the theoretical and the academic and all the ideas that we love to get into so much, and makes it concrete and mundane and boring and not shiny anymore. And yeah, I mean, that is true on some level, right? I think that one of the most practical things that humans do is research, right? Like, it's incredibly practical to think to ourselves, hey, if I study this thing for long enough, then I can create knowledge that then can inform future action, and then I won't screw up so much, right? Like, that's the point of research, right? And so that's an incredibly practical, concrete sort of approach to research. But I think that for a lot of students, especially doctoral students they're working through very academic texts, they're having very academic conversations with their peers, they're really sharpening those skills of thinking that are going to serve them for the rest of their lives. But then whenever it comes time to taking those skills and then putting them to the concrete task of making a research project that is serviceable for a specific purpose, I think a lot of folks find that type of project loses its magic. But I'm just here to say, like, even if it is less magical, it's more practical and it's helpful. And at the end of the day, as researchers and as professors and as teachers and all the things, all the roles that we have, that's what we're here for. We are servants to make sure that not just the people around us, the students in front of us, but the trajectory of human history is bettered by the work that we do. And what is more worthwhile or noble than providing very concrete, specific answers to the problems that people face in their lives? Finally, I think that a lot of early career writers get really interested in whatever it is, whatever topic or domain it is that they're interested in, right? They really geek out on it. They get really nerdy about it. And the translation from interest to researchability is not something that they've learned yet. And I think that especially if you're doing a thesis or dissertation, you're probably having a lot of conversations right now with your advisor, and your advisor is saying, no, that's too big. How about you cut that out? But you don't have to do all of those different methods. You don't have to have quite that many participants. You don't have to read that many articles, right? Because especially at the beginning of the project, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you're all eager beaver about things, and you really want to get things done, and you want to make your mark, and you want to read all the books and ask all the questions and do all the things. But as you've probably heard enough times to be nauseous at the statement, a done dissertation is a good dissertation. Same thing with anything else. Thesis, dissertation, article, book, whatever it is, it does no one any good for you to sit there and be glamored by the shininess of your topic and by the newness and novelty of what it is to you whenever you can provide answers that actually help people. So then what might be some ways that we can start to think about our projects in a more narrow sense and start honing in on the thing that's actually interesting, that is not only interesting to us, but is also of value to our readers. So the first thing that you might want to do is think about the specificity of the population that you are addressing. So if I use the topic of student success for college students, okay, well, maybe college students is too much. Maybe I go with first generation college students. Okay, well, that's going to narrow it down a little bit. Well, I'm a communication studies person, so maybe what I'm interested in is not student success across all their classes, but really how they are successful in the fundamentals of communication class that a lot of universities take across the United States, the course that teaches public speaking skills. So now I'm interested in how first generation college students find success in the oral communication course, that basic public speaking class. Maybe I even go further than that. I have some sort of intervention. So maybe I'm interested in first generation college students who read a certain type of textbook as opposed to those who do not read that textbook in their success in the oral comm course. Or maybe I compare first generation college students with traditional college students. So that way I can see where there might be a gap between a gap in services between those two groups, right? But in each one of those instances, you can see I'm narrowing things down. I'm narrowing down my population. I'm narrowing down the topic area. I'm narrowing down what type of data I'm gathering and how much of it. All those things make the project more and more specific. It also makes it easier then for me to look through the literature and go, has someone done this before? If they have, did they do it well? Or do I need to replicate a better study? Or have they not done it, but done things adjacent to it, in which case I can use that as an argument for a gap in literature. So by making our project narrower, we have now not only made it easier for us to do our literature review and our method and our design, but we've also made the contribution more concrete as to what we can actually even come up with. Based on that type of research project, I might be able to come up with interventions for first-generation college students that would help them be more successful in higher education. Again, that's an incredibly practical, useful thing for us to do. Another way that you can do this is to think about what's the relationship among the two or more concepts or ideas or variables that you want to study. So if I think, for example, how does peer mentorship influence retention among transfer students? Well, okay, so now all of a sudden, I'm not just studying the student success of transfer students. I'm studying the relationship between retention and peer mentorship in the context of a specific population, transfer students. So by thinking of what are the relationships among my different variables or concepts or ideas, I can then start to look at the literature again and see, has anyone studied peer mentorship? Has anyone studied retention? Has anyone studied peer mentorship as it influences retention? Okay, they have, but they did it for first-generation college students. Well, those aren't transfer students. So now we've got a gap. We know that this population has this type of finding, but what about this other population? Or maybe we know about peer mentorship and we know about transfer students, but we never really thought to put it together with retention. Great. So there's your gap in the literature. Retention now becomes a thing that you're adding. So by putting the different variables together, now we can start to see where those gaps are. Now, one thing that I will say is what this should not encourage you to do is do a sort of a throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks sort of approach, right? So don't just like take a bunch of concepts and then stick them together and think to yourself, okay, well, that's a research project because now I have these variables that should share a relationship. If there's not a literature-based reason as to why they should be together, then they're not together. But that's a sort of iterative process that you go through as you're developing your research idea and you're looking at the literature. The other thing that you can do is you can identify where there are tensions or contradictions in the literature. So all through high school and into college, I did speech and debate. I was on the debate team. And so that really carried over into my scholarship. And there is nothing that I love more than reading professors get snarky with each other as they argue back and forth about the things that they're passionate about. And sometimes those disagreements can be theoretical, sometimes they're philosophical, sometimes they're methodological, but it's always really interesting, at least to me, to see really smart people say really smart things as they are arguing with each other about these ideas that ultimately do have an impact and an influence on the world around us, right? The ideas that we have are not just contained to higher education. Whether your research is in STEM or in the humanities, liberal arts, whatever, right? The ideas that students come away with and that disseminate broadly throughout society, our ideas matter. So whenever people really go hammer and tongs at something, I always find it really, really fun. But that is to say that those types of arguments, especially if they are recent ones that are coming up in your field, those are places where you can identify what those contradictions or those tensions are, and then figure out how are you going to contribute to that conversation. So maybe there's an argument to be made about the philosophical differences that underpin the concept. Cool. Great. Then your project can be a contribution as to why you side with this rather than that person, or why you think that both of them are wrong. Or maybe it's methodological and you get to come in and do a very rigorous design that puts to rest outstanding questions in your field about an issue or an idea. Whatever it might be, it's important for you to know enough about your field and know enough about what's going on in it to be able to hone in on where those contradictions and those disagreements are. And then you might be the person who helps resolve those things, or at least contributes to them in a meaningful way that helps someone else down the line resolve those contradictions. Overall, what I would say is that as you start to develop your research interests, there are 3 things that I think that you should be keeping in mind. First, what do you want to understand? And this can be very broad. This can be the topics, the domains, just what are some things that really get your engine revved up? Because at the end of the day, That's what we're here for. Like, we're professors, we're PhD students, we're doctoral students, we're grad students, we're writers, we're researchers, we're scholars, all of those things because we're curious, because we were never satisfied with being told this is what it is. But instead, we always thought, yeah, really? I mean, I think I might want to just ask another question or two, please. Right? Like, we've always been the type of person that we've never just been satisfied with the thing that's in front of us. And so what is it that's really animating this for you? What's the big picture question that you're trying to get at? Then you can think to yourself, well, then what's the problem or the exigency or the specific phenomenon that I'm really trying to get at? This could be the concepts, the variables, the ideas, the dynamic, but this should be a smaller part of the bigger question. One of the analogies that I've used in the past has been to think of your research field as a diamond. What's the facet of the diamond? You don't get to study the whole diamond in one go. That's what in a program of research is. That's what in a field of study is. What's your one contribution? What's the facet of the diamond that you're going to study? And then finally, why does this matter? What's the practical thing that you're trying to address? Because all research, no matter how theoretical, no matter how academic, no matter how philosophical or whatever, right? It has a practical purpose to it. You had an issue, a question, an exigence, whatever, that arose that didn't have an answer to it. And hopefully, by having that answer, we can start to live a better life, whether that's articulating a new branch of ethics or philosophy, or coming up with a new invention, or a novel way of understanding a painting. All of those things are answers to questions that are being asked. And if a question is worth being asked, it's worth being answered. So I think that's going to about do it for me, folks. As always, I appreciate you listening. Next week's episode, I actually have an interview with Dr. Jack Baker, who is a professor at Stanford University. He's got a new book coming out that's on research writing and communicating research to different audiences. As you can imagine, as a communication studies person, I was pretty stoked to learn that people in his field of engineering are interested in those conversations too. And so I hope you tune in, because he's an incredibly smart, but also I found to be a very kind and generous person. And I think you're going to have a chance to learn a whole lot from him in that episode. Okay. So thank you so much. And I will see you in next week's episode.
Hey, co-authors, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.